Some time ago, there were two altar servers in the sacristy, and they were putting on their vestments. And one of the altar servers looked at the other one, and he said, "Hey," he said, "did you see Father and the deacon are wearing pink vestments today?" And the other altar server looked at him, and he said, "They're not pink, they're rose." He said, "I don't know." He said, "They look pretty pink to me." He said, "No," he said, "they're rose." He said, "You got to remember, Jesus rose from the dead. He didn't pink from the dead." Well, anyway, I've told you a couple of times some of the, I guess you could say, the stories of when I was called to become a deacon, right? And the first part of that came on a pager. And if you don't know what a pager is, you might ask someone older, because I don't have time to explain. But it came on a pager, and we started the diaconate formation in the inquiry stage, where my wife and I went to a meeting once a month, and just to learn about what the process was. And I'm going to tell you, it's a process. And when we got to the end of the process, there's a couple of interviews that you have to do, and you have to fill out an application. Well, I'm going to tell you what, a church is not fair, right? Because the man's application is 13 pages long, and the answers have to be handwritten. The wife's application is 5 pages long, and she can type her answers. I don't think that's fair. But anyway, we sent the application in, and I told my wife, I said, this is going to be it. I said, they're going to go through all the rest of this, and they're going to read it, and I'm not going to be qualified, so at least we tried. Well, we left to go on vacation, and we went to Natchitoches to the Festival of Lights. So it tells you about what time of the year it was. But the way they had told us was that the reply from the application wouldn't be for at least another week. Right? So when we got home, it was late Sunday afternoon, emptied the car out and everything, and went to the mailbox because nobody had checked it all weekend, and there was a letter from the Diocese of Houma Thibodaux. So I finally sat down, I opened the letter, and started to read it, and it said, "Congratulations, you have been accepted into diaconate formation." And I'm going to tell you, I cried. I cried, and what went through my mind was the name of 10 people that I knew that I thought would be better to be called to be in diaconate formation than me. 10 people that I thought, 10 men that I thought would be better deacons than I would ever be. And then God said, but they didn't fill out the application. You see, we are all called to some type of ministry. We are all called to something that God wants to use us for in our life, for His ministry, for His purpose, for His glory. And we have to wait. Some of us may know what that is already, but most of us have to wait to see how God is going to use us. Like I said, my calling came on a pager, which I think was a lot better than David, because he had oil dumped on his head. But anyhow, see, David was one of those. David, I guess in a sense, kind of felt like me. There's other people who are better than this. David was just a young boy. He was a shepherd. Never thought that he would be the king of Israel. He wasn't even in the line of Saul to be able to inherit the kingdom. But God gave it to him. Because God doesn't judge like we judge. God doesn't judge like people do. God doesn't look at our appearance. He looks directly into our hearts. And I guess He saw something in mine. But anyway, He calls us because He has a plan. And He calls us to His glory. And I'm going to tell you now, this gospel, this is one of those gospels that I have always taken issue with. Because at the beginning of the gospel, what does it say? It said that Jesus passed by this young man who was born blind. And when the disciples asked, did he sin or his parents sin? Jesus said neither. He said, no, he was born blind so that you could see the glory of God. And when I read that, it said that this man lived all of his life in darkness for this moment. He lived all of his life in darkness so that Jesus Christ could come and heal him and so that we could believe. so that he can open our eyes to who Jesus Christ is. And I took issue with that. Why would God afflict this man with darkness? Why would he be blind up to this point? Just so that we could believe. Isn't it amazing? But you see, we all have trials and issues in our life. We all suffer some kind of afflictions in our life. And sometimes it's to open up, it's to purify our hearts, to make us believe better in Jesus Christ, to make us look toward God for that guidance and that healing. And here was this young man, when God looked into his heart before he was born and saw something, and said, this man's heart is strong enough that he'll be born blind so that the glory of God could be shown through him. You see, it wasn't that he was afflicted with that blindness. He was called to be blind. He was called to help those people around him. Sure, he sat in the temple area and he begged. It didn't sound like he was starving. It sounded like he opened people up to the charity that God was calling them for. They helped him to survive. We don't know how old he was. We just know that he was of age. We don't know how many years he spent in darkness. But until Friday, 2 days ago, I had issue with this gospel. But 2 days ago, I guess you could say that Jesus opened up my eyes. Because this guy was not afflicted with blindness. He was graced with the blindness to help the people around him grow closer to God, to open up their hearts to the charity that they helped him to survive. But the most awesome thing is he sat there and waited to be healed by Jesus Christ. What an awesome thought. What an awesome thought that his ministry was to be blind until that day. And then he became a disciple of Jesus Christ because Jesus stopped and opened his eyes. And that's what his purpose was at that moment. To be a witness to us of who Jesus Christ is. What an awesome thought. What an awesome thing to think about how Jesus is waiting for us to answer our call. Jesus is calling us and we are living our lives. And sure, we have the struggles and the pain, the aches and the pains. But it's all to purify us, to make us better witnesses. I guess it was about a week ago, I was in a conversation with a priest. And I said, and we were talking about food and stuff like this. As y'all can tell, I like to talk about food. But anyway, we were talking about food, and I looked at the priest, and I said, if I make it to heaven, and he stopped me, and he says, whoa, he said, well, you don't have a lot of confidence, do you? I said, well, I know me better than you do. And he said, well, what happens if you make it to heaven? I said, I'm going to ask God, who was the first person to look at a crawfish and say, if we boiled this, it would be good to eat? And he said, why would you want to do that? I said, because my second question would be, is he in heaven? Because I want to shake his hand. Well, until Friday, that was a goal. But after Friday, after Christ opened my eyes to what this gospel is really telling us, I would like to meet the man who was born blind. I would like to meet that man and ask him, what was it like when Jesus approached you and spit on the ground and made clay and opened your eyes? I'll tell you, that part reminds me of when my mom, you had something on your face. A lot of us can remember that. Mom had something, you had something on your face, and she'd lick her thumb and clean your face off, right? I see some smiles. There's still a lot of people that do that. It's a rite of passage. I just want to let y'all know, our parents did it to us. We did it to our children. They're going to do it to theirs. But I want to ask that man, what did it feel like? What was it like to encounter Jesus Christ? When he opened your eyes, when he let you see the light that is Jesus Christ. Because that's what you were called to do. To be in his presence. What was that like? You see, we're all called to some ministry. We're all called to some purpose, to some way to show the glory of God in our lives. And most of us will say that we're not worthy. I'm going to tell you a little secret. We're not. But because of His sacrifice, because God called His Son to die on the cross for us, makes us worthy. And it's through Him that we serve. It's through Him that we see the light. You see, we're halfway through Lent, and we still have time to cleanse our hearts, to purify our hearts, so that we can open our eyes and see the light that is Jesus Christ. Or would we rather just be like the Pharisees and miss the whole thing?